Okay, let's get started today on the webinar. Welcome. Today's topic on the OneSignal's webinar will be covering the importance of customer onboarding. There's a few things that I'll be speaking to you today. First, a little introduction of myself. Hi, I'm Claudio Benedikter. I'm a solutions engineer here at OneSignal, and I'm based out of the London office, and I cover the entire EMEA region. As a solutions engineer, I'm mainly responsible to ensure that you, prospects or existing customers, have a good and thorough understanding of how a product can complement your needs and requirements. Fun little fact, I'm wearing the same shirt I have in this picture here that was taken just a few years ago, although I'm a little bit older today. For today's agenda, there will be 3 main points in addition to the Q&A. First, why is there a need to invest in onboarding to begin with? I'll give you some good food for thought. Second, what are the critical onboarding considerations that we recommend you take into account? Third, I will then open up our platform, OneSignal application, and give you a couple of examples on how you can manage the journeys in our tool and also how that would look like. So first, part of the agenda today. Why is there a need to invest in onboarding? First and foremost, there's a few factors that will push us into that decision and make it easy. The statistics there speak for themselves. The first week of any use, first week we mean when a user has registered, has opened an account, or has downloaded the app, or as soon as the user has been required, there's a very high chance, as a matter of fact, 1 to 5 users who will not open up or come back after the first use within the first week. Further pressure into onboarding considerations and the first 7 days is complemented by the other fact that it says there that there's a 60% chance that the user will not return if there is a longer gap between the first and second session. Where, of course, when you look at it after the first session, it's really important that we try to get the users back into the app or the website in that sense within less than 7 days. So I've opened the application as a new customer, make sure that I come back to it within 2 days, within 3 days, just to offset or mitigate the high chance that I will not open it again. Another market force that drives us towards a better investment decision for onboarding is the Apple's App Tracking Transparency Framework. Let's see how it makes it. As it says, it makes it harder for you to acquire new users, or expensive. So when you've already, in the top of the funnel, have invested and make sure that you bring in new customers, new users, with the combination that within the first 7 days, there's a very high chance that they will already abandon or not come back, it is even more important to engage with them, especially with this particular segment within iOS. Further, here's the 5 signs that your app needs an onboarding process, or your website, of course. The first one is, in order for you to deliver your service, your product, you do require that the users or customers provide some key information. This could be like an address for delivery, or it could be users complete a profile so that you get an understanding of their preferences of purchasing. Second is that within your app's core value proposition, personalization is a key part of that. So in here, if you start to, of course, having recommendations, it's important that you capture as much information as you can in relation to users' preferences, as an example. Third, in order for your app to work or your website to work, it is contingent on particular user permissions. Now, there is a whole host of user permissions that we can think about, namely permission to receive notifications, the app location, geolocation, and of course, making use of the camera and others. Fourth is that your app uses unique interactions So think here around a social sharing or the social interactions I could have within your app where the messages are really, or the notifications are really unique to the actions that I drive and perhaps the other users that I might interact with. The more unique the messaging or the engagement you have with your users is another sign that you need a valid and good onboarding process. And the fifth, also really important, is your app part of an emerging category? I.e., is it something that is that the wider market or the broader audience is not really yet familiar with? Is it something that is just emerging? Are you completely new to market with your value proposition, where a good amount of education will help any new users to get more familiar and acquainted with what it is that you're doing? So that's the first part of today's agenda. I hope that was helpful when we talked about why to invest in onboarding. Second part of the agenda are, what are some of the critical onboarding considerations that you may or should have? So first, define a success. These are very open questions to you uniquely. So ask yourself, what is it that you're trying to accomplish in the first engagement, on the first part of onboarding? What information or what can you track, and how do you know when onboarding is complete? You put figures behind that, especially when you say, I know that the onboarding is complete when X has been reached. For instance, a profile has been completed, or the number of sessions has exceeded 5 or 10 sessions, or whatever that might be. That point, you say, perfect, the onboarding is complete. Now we can move on and start to engage in different journeys or different campaigns, so to speak. In terms of what can you track, again, being able to confidently say, within my data stack, or within my tech stack, these are the following information that I can get and I could potentially use to ensure that my onboarding is as personalized or as fluent as possible. So to recap, these are very open questions. I hope these are good for you to have a start with and asking yourself, if I've answered myself these here, then I know what the success of the onboarding would look like, and that helps us and yourself, of course, to get to that goal much more efficiently. Second consideration is to ask for the essential permissions early, and this is especially when your app or your website relies on specific permissions. Sending just a native prompt, while acceptable and can of course work, adding more context into the reason why you are asking, let's say, to enable location services or to enable notifications or enabling the use of the camera, whatever that might be, is you will get higher quality of opt-ins, so users and customers will know more precisely why they're opting into or sharing their permissions with you. And of course, with the higher quality of that opt-in, saying, oh, I know why you're asking for me to share my location service, or I know why you asked me to send notifications, means that eventually your messaging strategy will be more successful by means of the click-through rate and the overall responses. Another consideration perhaps is to use a carousel. So when we talk about a carousel, we're speaking about the in-app message as a channel and applicable to those who have an application on a mobile. The in-app message is, of course, a message that is propped up on my mobile phone here when I have an active session within your app. Of course, the first consideration is to say, at what point do I show my users a message? A carousel here is a type of in-app message that we heavily recommend, especially during the onboarding process. Here's a couple of reasons that you can see here on the slide as to why. But mainly, it helps to break up perhaps a rather elaborate or a lot more of information that you would like to convey to your new customers and to new users. It breaks it up by the means of different messages that users can swipe through, and hence it becomes a carousel. This is directly backed up by successes that certainly our customers have seen. For instance, Ogun here, they have straight away saw an 80% increase in their in-app messaging in relation to click-through rate by having used the carousel. Again, to recap, it helps to break up the messages. It is a more user-friendly flow, and within sort of one interaction, you're able to convey more points, to convey more information that would be important and critical, again, when we think about the onboarding of any new customers that you have. Thinking omnichannel. So this is the last point in our second point of the agenda in relation to the considerations for onboarding. Onboarding, the way that we look at it, is a series of messages that you'll be sending to your users and customers when they have had a first session with you. They download the application, have registered, whatever the starting point might be. Omnichannel here is our recommendation that you consider using different communication channels to send to your customers and users. Primarily mobile push, email, in-app messaging, but we can also, of course, extend that to SMS, for instance. A mix of these is preferred. But of course, if you have an effective onboarding flow, then the omnichannel will be especially important when you've captured the communication preferences of your customers and users. You say, oh, I prefer to receive emails, or I prefer to have a mobile notification because I've been able to permission for it. If you know that, then you can use a messaging platform like OneSignal more effectively to send notifications in the preferred channel to users. But also when you think around perhaps the urgency. So where do emails fit in terms of the urgency of notifications that you have in comparison to mobile push? So a message that appears on my phone wherever and whenever I am. Good. So with this, we've covered two main agenda points. Again, we've talked around the need to invest in onboarding, and we've looked at some considerations. And the main takeaways of this are, when you think about the need to invest, the statistics have spoken very clearly that the first week is very critical to ensure that your customers have at least 2 or 3 or more sessions in that first week, as there's a very high churn rate. And that is, again, coupled with the fact that market forces like the Apple privacy transparency framework is making it ever more expensive for you to acquire new customers. And secondly, just to recap on the considerations, again, these were very broad here, right? How should you be positioning in-app messaging and what considerations would you have about the omni-channel approach? Next part of the agenda before moving to Q&A, I'm going to switch over to the OneSignal application. I'll do a little bit of a platform demo for you. So let's get started. I'll be going through 3 things today. First is sort of a message composer. So you could be expecting when you work with OneSignal. And then 2 and 3, I have a couple of examples of how different onboarding journeys might look like and how you can manage this. At first, a little bit of an introduction into OneSignal application. Currently, I find myself here under the Messages tab within my profile and within my own application. It's just to illustrate the different channels, of course. Before you start a journey or create a journey, you've got to have what are the messages? How do I compose them? And in which channel? In this example, for today, I'll be just introducing the in-app messaging. In-app messaging is, again, very important in the onboarding because we've discussed that. This helps you to prompt users to capture their permissions earlier. And when you're thinking about iOS users as well, we've got some very specific use cases for that. To get started with this is very, very simple. With us being installed, you do not need to have any more developer work or developer interactions to send out an in-app message. There's no more releases needed. You have the editor as is here on the screen, and you can manage this. So one consideration that we talked about is consider to have a capture permissions quite early on. This example, we want to be targeting iOS users, so I've chosen my audience right here, iOS users only. As for iOS, we want to ensure that we can send them push notifications, thus extending onto channels and an important channel to communicate with them. Second step here is sort of a drag and drop editor. On the left-hand side, I've got my components of the message between the images, the buttons, and text there. I can rearrange them very simply by tagging up. I can duplicate and bring in more blocks. And of course, I can personalize these. For instance, the button here that says allow, of course, we want to ensure that the push permission prompt now is being brought in through iOS. Again, here, just to reiterate the point, this is a soft prompt. Why are you looking to capture that permission? What is the benefit for your new customer, for your new user to allow this particular permission? If I get that, perfect. Then I have then the quality of my opt-in is going to be a lot higher because I'm brought into the message. I understand this, as opposed to a native prompt where the quality might be lower in terms of have I just clicked in order to proceed or have I made a decision there on the spot. This is just an example of an in-app message, and wanted to illustrate this because we spoke about this when the considerations. And a builder like so is very similar to all the other channels when we think about push, email, and SMS. So next, let's talk about a couple of journey examples for onboarding. First, we've got a very straightforward and a very effective yet linear approach to looking at an onboarding flow. This is very popular, especially with our customers, to have something of the sort that looks like this. Where at the top of the funnel, I choose very simply the journey settings. For instance, here I say, yeah, I want to target, of course, the new customers. They've just had a session. And other settings, again, very important. Of course, make sure that in this example, they go through the entire journey, because in this here, there are a number of set messages I would like to convey or like to send to my customers that they need to be aware of, regardless of the actions, regardless of the circumstances that are happening. So I will go through the entire journey, and of course, an onboarding journey must be one that can only be received once for users. This example, as soon as a new user is in, my first note is to wait 1 day, and then I'll be sending the first push notification. For instance, in this example right here, I'm sending a first notification that talks about, hey, welcome to the application. Here is a little bit of information for you, right? Did you know that you have, let's say, free delivery on your first order? Whatever that first message it might be that hits the nail on the head, I'm going to have it right here. This is my preview of how the message would look like. In this example as well here, best practices to make the notifications also very actionable. For instance, action buttons really help to take users down a couple of different paths. Of course, sort of a reaction in here. In this choice here, I say, oh, I want to start shopping, or let's say I want to save it to wallet. Just examples of action buttons here. These further help to, of course, increase the click-through rate and therefore the retention. And I follow this path, right? I wait the first day, send off my first notification. This is the first message I want to be sending out to my new customers. Then let's wait a day, or of course, I can edit that. If maybe 1 day is too short between the messages, I can have 2 days. Very easy to edit. And then I'll be sending the second notification right here with a different message, of course. I can build out on this. Usually an onboarding journey like this will consist of about 3 messages spaced out over the first week. Remembering that the first week is crucial to making sure that your customers and users do not churn within there as you've just acquired them. So let's look how you can make this. Very simple. Add a note, let's say another wait note. Make this customizable. So again, I'm going to follow this and say 2 days, just as an example. And from there, before users exit through the journey, I want to send a third message. Click on the note here. I choose the channel. In this case, we're going to continue with push notifications. If I wanted to, I can, of course, use the email. And then here I got this. I can either choose a message I have previously created, like the message I've shown you beforehand, or very simply, I can go here, create a new template, And then I can start with a blank canvas, so to speak. Second example of the onboarding journey, having covered sort of a linear approach, again, just to sort of zoom out on this is what it looks like. Start at the top, wait, and a series of messages that are all spaced out with time operators. Let's look at a different example. That includes what we call branching. And branching is useful because it takes into account any actions or events that are happening that your customers or new users are taking throughout the onboarding flow. So you're a lot more reactive in that sense. This fictitious example, say we're going to have like an onboarding example for finance. So what I want to do here at the top of the funnel, of course, I want to make sure that users enter in here as normally. I can again change the extra rules in this instance. Let's say that my main thing that I would like to achieve from this onboarding journey, again going back to earlier, what are the main considerations? How do you define success? When that point is reached, then you might say, yeah, as soon as that point is reached, like a profile has been completed, I want to put in an extra criteria. So the journey has been successful. It only took a couple of days or a couple of messages for my new customers to create the profile or to share the preference. Whatever that delta is that you say this is defined success, I can input that in here by means of an extra criteria, not to force everybody to go through the same linear flow, as an example. So let's break this down. First of all, a bird's eye view of the current journey. So how I can manage this. Of course, I can continue to zoom out and get a much better pictures. You can see there's a few branching involved in here. This, me as an editor, will help me to say, right, okay, this journey, I understand it. I can see the different nodes here. They make sense to me, and I've got a good appreciation of how it looks at a high level. But let's investigate a little bit closer. First, entrance criteria. Again, with onboarding, it should be quite simple. Within first session, within the day of the first session, whatever that might be, send off a notification, be it through push, be it through email, or whatever that might be. Then we have a wait note. But the difference here is the branching, of course. In this instance, what I want to do in this example is I want to do a little bit of a check. Because I'm in the world of financing, here's very important that users verify their identity as the first step. Because if they verify their identity, I can take now the next step. Once that's done, perfect. My services or my value proposition can be effectively used. And this is why I've got a tool like so here. I'm doing a check. Having first send you a notification, have you yet verified your identity? If you haven't, then we'll take you through a different flow here. Send you another notification asking you, hey, come in, verify your identity. Here are the reasons why you should do this again. Be very good and clever in your messaging. And then have another wait note. And then we can do a further check, for example, right here, where if it still haven't verified the identity, we can continue to message just until we get to that point here, because we know verifying the identity or whatever that delta is crucial to having a good onboarding experience. As we go through this flow here, and then we continue not to, let's say, respond to the messages in here, I now exit, let's say, a user with that particular tag where I say, onboarding follow-up needed is true. What this does is me as a customer have not yet responded to any of the first 3 messages. It'll say, hey, Claudio, he needs to be tagged with the following, and then perhaps we can enter Claudio into a different journey. All in an effort to make sure that I'm on board correctly and that I do the things that are needed in order for me to effectively use the company's services or the value proposition. And we can follow this flow continuously through. Let's say we've now performed the first action. There will be those who have not responded to anything in here. We exit them out of the journey and saying they need a follow-up because they haven't verified their identity. But to all the other paths here that lead to a yes, we're now going into the second part of this onboarding journey here. And let's say the second milestone is for me, right, verified identity, have they now added the payment method? Now I can almost repeat this process. If you haven't done this, I can send you a push notification and another one and continue through that flow until you've done that. It's entirely customizable, of course, how we do this. It's very easy to add add the various nodes in here. Just a high level, when we think about splitting customers, we've got the yes, no branch, so we can look up have they created any actions, but of course there's a previous message behavior where have they clicked on the message or have they not received it. Okay, I hope this was helpful. We've now covered the demo. Sorry, let's get this in here. Next one I would like to welcome here, of course, is any Q&A, please. So if you have questions about anything that's been mentioned, please feel free to pop that into the questions. Okay, so first question that has come through is how to select the right channels for onboarding in a multi-channel approach. That's a good question. It is entirely, of course, dependent on whether or not you have the preferences of the users and what communication channel they would like to, and a combination of what urgency do you place on specific notifications. Bearing in mind that push is more for an immediate reaction, email for a bit of a slower reaction there. But with OneSignal, as I've shown you in the demonstration earlier, it's very easy for me to add a note and saying, I want to send it an email and push, whatever that might be. The second question is how to select the right channels. Oh, sorry, that's the repeat. Here we go. It says, how do I personalize my customer onboarding with OneSignal? That's a good question. I'm happy to, again, follow through on a different webinar, but at a high level, personalizing the onboarding is making effective use of any data points or any tags, so to speak, that you have of your new customers and users. OneSignal will make it very easy for you as an editor of the application to add in a tag, let's say the first name in here or any other personalizations within the message. We can connect this with direct events within the application or with the website, but we can also connect and bring this information from your backend. Another question, sorry, that's come through. Is it possible to create messaging workflows that automatically trigger when a user takes a specific action? This is great, because here it's essentially saying, hey, I want to send a series of notifications when I know that you have done something, a specific action of sort, not just necessarily that you have opened the application or you have new. The answer is absolutely yes. Very easy to set it up within OneSignal. So we can look up the actions or the events that are happening, form that part into a segment where users can qualify to be in or out of it, and then trigger a series workflow. Okay. Look, I think we've gone just past now. We're on time, half past. I would like to thank you for attending today. I hope this was helpful. And if you have and would like to have more questions or any follow-up, please do reach out to us. I wish everyone a good morning. Goodbye.